Could everyone take their seats, please? Good afternoon, everyone. It's now 1:30, so I shall resume this inquiry regarding Purley Baptist Church. This is day 6. Usual reminders, would everyone please put their name on the attendance list and ensure their mobile devices won't ring while the inquiry is sitting. The remaining programme, well, first of all, to tell you that this morning I conducted accompanied site visits around this building, around the town, and up to Farthing Down. The remaining matters are to have a final discussion of conditions and the planning obligation if necessary, and hear closing statements. I have just heard from one lady who unfortunately wasn't able to come yesterday, Roxana Bigord. I believe she wants to make a very short statement opposing the appeal, so I will hear that if she's ready now. Do you want to come and sit up here, please?
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for letting me speak today. Much of what I'm going to say, I'm sure, has been shared by many of the residents of this area, but Purley is much like a heartbeat, and from that you have vessels. If you block a part of that vessel, it actually then becomes a problem. Very much this site, to me, will result in traffic chaos, parking problems, which then will spread out into the areas around us, causing disheartenment and discontentment with the other residents. We already have problems with our services in Purley, as we well know. How will we then accommodate the additional needs for our doctors, our schools, our public services as well? 17 stories, or whatever, however you wish to put it, is far too high and is out of character of Purley as we know and love. There isn't anything to say that we shouldn't develop the area, but we have to be very, very mindful of what we are actually going to do if we are to embark on such a big undertaking. It would then leave us wide open to other developers then to put up more skyscrapers. Also, we are aware over the last few years we have had many occasions of flooding as well. And that as well, if that was to happen again, it would cause a major, major problem with this particular development being where it is. Those of you that use the Purley Cross regularly know how difficult it is at certain points throughout the day with the traffic, and it wouldn't take a lot more or even a lot less to make that more chaotic. Where would these people be parking at weekends? We already know that outside there's a single red route. What would happen to that? That would be completely parked and utilised throughout the whole of the weekend, or Sunday in particular. So what we would do in essence would be changing the whole structure of an area in quite a short space of time. How much disruption is going to go on whilst this is being developed? It will not, you're going to have large lorries, cranes situated around this development, which is going to impact on the traffic, people getting to and from their journeys. I, for one, has a son that goes to school in West Croydon. It's a horrible journey at the best of times, and how much more time will he have to factor into his day? I would beg you, please, 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 to reconsider the decision to place such a big skyscraper into Purley. We have a beautiful, beautiful little town here. We know it has to change, but not to the degree that this is going to bring. And are the developers actually going to help with the infrastructure of Purley if they are going to carry on pursuing this development? Because obviously it's going to come at a great cost, and what are those, and who are going to meet those costs? I can only urge all of you to please come together and listen to what we've all been saying, to please, yes, develop the land, develop the, obviously the area, but please not to this degree. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, So turning to the conditions and the 1006, were there any outstanding queries on the planning obligations, the section 106 and other agreements? There were none from me. Any others? Does it need... No, it's on.
It's on. Yeah, we already made a point about none of the 106 money has been spent in the rest of Purley, and that's the only point we have out, which we will make in our summing up. Thank you.
Thank you. So turning to conditions, did you get the revised copy of the conditions? And
any comment?
Did that...
As I was
Okay.
here for it, I just...
That was the document distributed yesterday, wasn't it? So it became document 7C. So
Yeah.
7C or 5C?
What?
I can't remember which way round it was.
7C. On, yeah.
Okay.
7C. I've suddenly become numerate. So yes, that was distributed when you were here yesterday.
That's right.
Great.
Did you have any matters arising from the
No,
changes?
we have no matters, thank you.
Okay, I have just a couple. The travel plan condition, which was 17 and now is 14, I was asked to refer to core documents CD 114 and 115, which are the specific travel plans, and that's very helpful, thank you. The condition refers to aims and objectives. Now, those two documents talk about specific targets or sub-targets, and I wondered whether it would be more precise to refer to those in the condition. Of course.
Yes, so that's as far as we're concerned, that's fine.
So would it just say objectives and targets?
Well, they're your conditions. While we're hearing the closings, do you want to have a little tweak and suggest a wording at the towards the end?
Well, I was just going to simply suggest we add after objectives and
Objectives and targets. Fine. Yeah. Yeah. No problem there at all. That's that one sorted.
Thank you.
The what's now 17, the air quality condition. The evidence I heard was that the ventilation strategy would go above and beyond. That's what's in the recommended mitigations, isn't it? So that does cover that one.
Yes.
Yep. Thank you. Sorry, not reading my own notes there. The condition concerning water, condition 25, sorry about that, there was a discussion about the use by the church and community facilities of water, and there's been no change to this, which only refers to residents. Now, I don't think at this stage we want to look at anything complicated, but it strikes me that, as was pointed out, it's a Baptist church, and whether if a lot of water is used for that purpose, whether there should be some recycling scheme or whatever. And I wonder whether this refers to residents, whether for the other side of the development, the church and community side, whether a condition should suggest a scheme be put forward for minimising the use of water. thoughts on that?
Well, so if it's phrased in that sort of manner, then I can't imagine there would be any objection to that.
Mr. Morgan?
So we would be happy with that suggestion and understand it. Thank you.
Okay, it would leave plenty of scope for something to be done and for it to be reasonable, and
Yeah, so,
Mr. White and his colleagues to check it.
yeah.
Thank you. What's now 26, the detailed drainage strategy. Says prior to commencement, various things should be done, and it says at the end it should be carried out in accordance with the approved strategy. I just wanted to float whether that accordance with the approved strategy includes retention and maintenance as far as the maintenance plan and any additional mitigation.
Well, so if provided the strategy deals with those matters, then
It should do
plainly
so.
it would.
It would do so.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there is specific provision, sir, as I'm sure you know, for a management and maintenance plan. So hopefully that
That
binds
would
it in.
wrap it up.
Yeah.
Good. So just a couple of other queries. The same sort of point in what's now condition 37, what was added was the sprinkler at item 12, and there's also the mechanical ventilation at item 10. It says after that the details approved should be provided and completed, but I'm not sure that that ties up the retention and maintenance of those items.
Well, plainly that they should be retained and maintained, and so if you think the wording is slightly deficient, then patently we wouldn't and couldn't and wouldn't object to that.
Splendid. Well, that's why I raise it.
Indeed.
So it doesn't come as any surprise.
Thank you, sir.
That one's covered. Right. Those were all my final
Thank
queries
you,
on
sir.
the conditions. Anything else?
Yes, so there are two, one document from the applicants and one from the council. If we do ours first, simply because in our sequence of numbering we've numbered this as number 25, sir. So this is a letter from BNP Paribas providing
Thank you.
additional elaboration, if you like, of answers to your various queries concerning affordable housing. What's the date of the letter? What's the date of that letter?
So 25, this is sort of the counterpart to 23, is that right?
25 would be the counterpart to 23, absolutely, sir. Yes, thank you.
Okay.
So that's, sorry, sir.
Lovely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I know my own friend has one, yeah.
Mr. Morgan, you have something?
I do, sir. You asked for confirmation in writing that the council solicitor and the council had agreed the amendments to the legal agreement, if you recall.
You showed me that.
I showed you it, and I'll give you the copy, and it includes an email from the applicant solicitor, Mr. Paul Thompson, which sets out what the changes are, and it has a brief agreement from ourselves, as I indicated to you yesterday.
Lovely.
And that'll be document 26.
26.
Thank you very much.
So if were you about to move on to the closing submissions?
I was indeed.
So just forgive me, but there was just that point that I raised yesterday, and that is to say, to ask you whether you could be so kind as to confirm that the various inquiry documents that have been submitted addressing various points that you've raised sufficiently address your points such that there aren't any outstanding matters.
I have all the information I need on all those points.
Thank you very much indeed, sir.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
Right, anything else before we move to closing submissions? Then in reverse order, Mr. King, the closing submission for the Residents' Associations, please.
Do you wish us to distribute copies?
Yes, please, that would be terrific. Thank you. Document we're up to 27, thank you. And if I could ask in due course if you could email a copy through, please, to Mr. Salter in the office, that would be very helpful.
Yes, we will do so. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, good afternoon. This is the Joint Residents Association's closing statement. And just to confirm that we are representing 7 of the local residents' associations: Riddlesdown, Causden West, East Causden, Hartlean District, Kenley District, Old Causden and Sanderstead Residents Associations. And we are all opposed to the present planning application in Mosaic Place. In our introductory remarks, the 7 residents' associations in the area adjoining the proposed development at Mosaic Place have been grateful to the Inspector for allowing us the opportunity over the past week to present our case and wish to summarise why and the overwhelming majority of our members formally object to the proposed scheme. We are a group of lay people who represent up to 15,000 members, and our case is built largely upon the concerns expressed by our local communities across Purley, Causden, Sanderstead and Kenley. The residents' associations are non-political, non-sectarian, representing the wider community. Our members draw from a varied section of demographics, and it is those people whom we have represented during the inquiry. We do wish to make it clear that all the aforementioned residents' associations support the work that Purley Baptist Church does in Purley community. And we have no problem in principle with the expansion of the church and the associated facilities. We share many of the aspirations behind the proposed scheme: the provision of affordable housing, the regeneration of Purley Town Centre, and increasing the community facilities available to local residents. We are not anti-development. We wish to see the site redeveloped, as part of it has been wasteland and detrimental for Purley for more than 30 years. However, where we differ from the applicant is that we do not believe a 17-storey development in the centre of Purley is appropriate or necessary to deliver the aspirations behind the scheme. Instead, we contend that the proposed development will generate a large number of significant problems for the Purley district centre and beyond, due to its inappropriateness of scale. On landmark buildings, we do not in principle object to a landmark building on this site. On the proposed building height, it is our contention that the sheer height of the proposed development is excessive and wholly out of place in respect of Purley's townscape. We do not believe that adequate consideration has been taken into account in relation to the points in the London Plan of Policy 7.7, 7.7C, Section B, 7.7c, section C, 7.25 and 7.27 in the London Plan. In point 77c, it states, tall and large buildings should, in B, only be considered in areas whose character would not be affected adversely by the scale, mass or bulk of all tall, large buildings. In C, relate well to the form, proportion, composition, scale and character of surrounding buildings. Urban gain and public realm, including landscape features, particularly at street level. We do not believe the case as presented by the applicants has taken into account the local heritage. On point 725, it states, tall and large buildings are those that are substantially taller than their surroundings, cause a significant change to the skyline. However, they can also have a significant detrimental impact on local character. Therefore, they should be resisted in areas that will be particularly sensitive to their impact and only be considered if they are the most appropriate way to achieve the optimum density in highly accessible locations, are able to enhance the qualities of their immediate and wider settings, or if they make a significant contribution to local regeneration. Again, we do not believe the applicant have demonstrated that a tall building very close to the highway boundary on Brighton Road is appropriate, and it would dominate the nearby 3- and 4-storey shopping parade. Croydon's emerging local plan is almost contradicted by this proposal. Emerging CLP2 in 2017, policy DM16 says in section 351, tall buildings should respect and enhance local character and conserve or enhance the significance and setting of the assets of a wider historic environment. This proposed building does not meet this criteria because it does not respect, conserve or enhance the settings. 3.7. Further emerging policy document CLP11 2017, para 7.59, says in relation specifically to Purley, as a broad location, the main focus of a major residential growth will be in and around the district centre with high quality residential development that will respect the existing residential character and local distinctiveness. Existing policy CLP1 213, para 7.58 says, the main focus of major residential growth will be the district centre with high quality residential development that will respect the existing residential character and local distinctiveness. Local character is not respected by the proposed building, which is completely out of keeping with the local area because it is 4 to 5 times higher than the immediate surrounding buildings. Finally, policy SP4, 4.6 of both existing and emerging Croydon local plan makes clear in section A that buildings must respect and enhance the local character and heritage assets. Again, the proposal does not do that due to its design and excessive height compared to nearby buildings. In the national policy, para 58.2 also requires a local character to be respected. Despite references in the emerging Croydon Plan CLP2 policy DM 44.1 to the potential for a tall building in Purley, the other criteria mentioned above are not met and are grounds for refusal. On point 4, on overshadowing, we do not believe that our concerns regarding overshadowing were addressed by the applicant. We contend that overshadowing will occur to neighbouring properties, especially Tudor Court, and the surrounding Purley District Centre in Russell Hill Road and Brighton Road, especially in the months of November, December and January. On planning issues, we note that policy DM44, as part of the emerging CLP2 plan, has not yet been adopted, which means it cannot carry the full weight of the development plan status. On density, as the London plan is part of Croydon's development plan, this proposal does not present convincing evidence for going beyond the appropriate density range of 700 per hectare, habitable rooms per hectare, in the London plan. Neither does it demonstrate that it represents an appropriate configuration in the terms of scale, massing and layout, given the existing Purley townscape. On average, it is 17% above the upper end of the appropriate PTAL range in the density matrix. While the overall proposed site is 807 habitable rooms per hectare, the island site has a density of 1,052, which is 50% higher than the top end of the range of 200 to 700 habitable rooms per hectare, specified in the Table 3.2 in the London Plan of 2016. Policy 3.4 says clearly that any development in excess of these figures should be resisted. That is, these densities are not merely guidelines that can be ignored or overlooked. On heritage, we do not believe that these proposals seek to form a positive relationship with Purley District Centre, principally the Victorian shopping parades in Brighton Road and Russell Hill Road. The bulk and massing of the buildings proposed means that they will dominate the townscape, particularly the existing character of the area and skyline, which is exasperated by the lack of any architectural rhythm or shared detailing. The contrast between the proposed development and the existing urban grain is jarring, described as dramatic by a heritage witness, rather than striking, reflecting the lack of any positive relationship between the proposal and the Purley District Centre. Specifically, the schemes will have a detrimental effect on 960 Brighton Road, which is now Pizza Express. The Council's Heritage Officer, Mr Lacavara, had agreed that this development will present a degree of harm to 960 Brighton Road. On affordable housing, the Residents' Association strongly support the provision of affordable housing for the local people in the Purley area. We do not, however, believe that the low level of affordable housing proposed is acceptable. Given the strategic importance and locations of these sites, we do not agree that the provision of community facilities as part of this scheme constitutes exceptional circumstances for the low level of affordable housing proposed on the site. On community facilities, we were surprised to hear that the statement from Purley Baptist Church, in which it was clearly stated community facilities would not be available to everyone in the wider community as restrictions will apply. Croydon Council has responsibility to ensure that community facilities are available to all sections of Purley community. These should be marketed to all community groups. However, this is in contention with the ethos and the statements we have heard from the Baptist Church. If facilities are not going to be available to various sections of society, it's difficult to see how Croydon Council can be satisfied that the facilities are available to the wider community. We feel that the community spaces are inadequate on both proposed sites, and the south side courtyard site would be overshadowed. On regeneration of Purley Town Centre, we strongly support the regeneration of the island site and the south sites. We continue to work with other stakeholders to help facilitate this. We do not, however, believe that these proposals will create substantial social, economic and environmental benefits for Purley District Centre and the wider area. Rather, the lack of relationship with Purley District Centre will further lead to the decline of viability and vitality of the district centre has been evident since the Tesco's development in the 1980s. On parking, we believe parking provision will exacerbate the existing parking problems in Purley residents face in the surrounding area, as it is done in other areas. Our experience also shows us that residents of social and affordable homes also have similar levels of usage and ownership of cars and vans, as they frequently have the use of company vehicles. The uncertain future of the council's owned multi-storey and Russell Hill Place car parks diminishes the claim that there will be plenty of other parking in Purley. We are also well aware of the congestion and pollution caused by car use, but we believe that persuasion is more effective than coercion. Purley is in outer London and is not the same as Camden, Islington or inner London district centres, where many facilities are geographically close. We do not believe that sufficient parking has been provided for deliveries such as fast food, white goods, supermarket deliveries or online mail order deliveries. Not enough consideration has been given to this and the likely increase of this trend. The biggest increase in traffic over the past 10 years has been white vans or commercial vehicles, typically mail order deliveries, and that is established in RAF van trends of 2014. We as local residents who use the junction on Russell Hill of the A23 on a regular basis do not believe that the council or TfL have made the correct decision in relation to the vehicle entry and exit point from the proposed development, which is so close to the signalled junction of Brighton Road. TfL also raised adverse comments in relation to this on their initial visit to the site. We are still of the view that when a major event has finished in the auditorium, up to 80% of the vehicles will attempt to leave at the same time, adding to congestion on the already very busy Russell Hill Road. The proposed exit is on the narrowest part of Russell Hill Road, almost opposite the junction to Russell Hill Place, a public car park exit. It has been agreed that the A23 and the Purley Gyratory are one of the busiest and complex traffic areas in the borough of Croydon. It is also clear that when the traffic exit the island site, lane changes will have to occur either before the traffic lights at Brighton Road or immediately thereafter for those wishing to travel along the A22 towards Whiteleaf. In our view, will increase the likelihood of further accidents by these junctions. It's clear that the majority of accidents which happen around the gyratory are close to Russell Hill Road entrance and exit. Fortunately, these accidents generally result in minor injuries, with the majority being just vehicle shunts. Non-injury accidents are not recorded, but these can cause considerable delays to traffic flow, subsequently resulting in delays and additional pollution. On air quality, Purley Gyratory already has poor air quality and is above the WHO guidelines, and parts of the Brighton Road also exceed EU air quality levels. We are still of the view that the exit onto Russell Hill will decrease local air quality due to the need for vehicles exiting the site having to queue to enter Russell Hill Road. The Council's air pollution representative, Mr Simmons, has agreed with us that the proposed development will take place within an area where harmful levels of nitrous dioxide and exceeds EU legal limits, and that the proposed development will only increase these levels. Studies by both Dudley and Lambeth councils concluded that stationary vehicles create twice as much pollution as moving vehicles. 40 or more vehicles could be leaving the site at the same time after a major event. This will increase the level of pollution at the exit and in Russell Hill Road at these times. We welcome Croydon Council has instigated idling patrols to deal with this problem. However, we note that this is a small team and is only likely to visit the site infrequently and only or more frequently if there has been complaints. The idling patrol will have no jurisdiction for vehicles queuing in traffic on the public highway, nor for those on the island site. I'll move on to flooding. We do believe the collection of surface water within the site, then the distribution into the surface water sewers has been sufficiently addressed. But we do not believe that it has been proved that during flash floods, the main water holding tanks will be sufficient to avert flooding outside the proposed development in Purley Town Centre. What if the surface water sewers are backed up due to flooding in Purley Cross? Where does the surface water from the site then go? We do not believe this question was answered satisfactorily at the inquiry. It was also stated that under certain flash flood situations, the proposed development car park would flood, possibly putting the basement site machinery and services in jeopardy. We do not believe that the flooding by the Caterham and Causden Bournes, which meet under the gyratory by Tesco's, has been sufficiently addressed, as these tend to flow above ground and flood on a 5 to 7 year basis when the aquifers on the North Downs overflow. From previous history of flooding, this has caused extensive flooding immediately in front of the proposed tower on Brighton Road. On pedestrian routes, we are of the view that the exit onto Russell Hill Road will interfere with pedestrian flow and affect the air quality in Russell Hill Road, especially when cars leave after an event. We question what contingency plan is in place, especially for the additional pedestrians when the traffic lights on the gyratory system fail, as was the case on Wednesday the 10th of January. Pedestrians needing to cross these junctions at the time put themselves at huge risk. On landscaping, we are not convinced that the proposed Scots pine trees would be best suited to the roof conditions and in gale force winds. These trees would either be blown over or have branches snapped off and could fall into the street below. We contend sufficient evidence has not been proved as to the depth of the root support system and whether the restraint straps and roof system will support these trees in high winds. 70, on Section 106, we find it disappointing that none of the Section 106 monies is proposed to be spent in other areas within the centre of Purley. And on conclusion, our residents are not natural revolutionaries. They accept the growth is necessary if we are to provide homes for local people and ensure our district centre provides the services that we need. However, strong reaction to these schemes is noteworthy, given the overwhelming concerns over the detrimental impact that they will have on the locality. On balance, while we accept and acknowledge that the scheme does many good parts to the application, the Joint Residents Association are firmly against this development in its present form. Finally, we would like to acknowledge the hospitality that has been provided over the past 6 days of the inquiry by the Purley Baptist Church, the Minister and his staff, and we'd also like to thank the Planning Inspector for his impartiality adjudicating this inquiry. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. King. Mr. Morgan.
About my closing.
I think I've already got it.
I think he gave you one as he came through.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Just me, document 28.
I don't think he was sure what stage we were at, so you've got the advanced copy, although you haven't had a chance to look at it.
I haven't had a chance.
So I think that's document 28, isn't it?
That's correct.
There you go. Okay. So that's convenient, thank you.
Yes.
So I offer my usual health warning. I don't know what it is, but when you go through these things, typos become invisible until you read them out. So if there are any left, and I'm sure there are, I apologise now.
Don't
I
worry.
hope they don't distract us too much. That's my first point. The second point, sir, is that I have fully referenced it, but I don't want to read all the references in the footnotes, but occasionally I will refer to them. But all my submissions are referred to the evidence, I mean, the core documents and the inquiry documents.
That's very helpful, thank you.
Using the usual shorthand. So what I would like to do is to summarise our position on the main points that have arisen in the usual way, and I'm going to do that, so as I'll explain in a moment, by revisiting the 10 points I made in my opening, and if you like, test them against the evidence that you've heard. Just to put that into context by a short introduction, so in my opening statement on behalf of the Council, reference was made to the extensive pre-application discussions and the thorough consideration of the proposals that had led to a design that we maintain is undoubtedly of high and exceptional quality and policy compliant in all other respects. So that has been more than borne out, we suggest, by the evidence provided to this inquiry. And these closing submissions will support that by considering the 10 specific points referred to in our opening statement against the evidence and issues raised. At the outset, however, it is important to emphasise that the painstaking evolution of the current proposals was in the context of a plan-led approach in accordance in particular, as you have heard, with Policy 77A of the London Plan. Further, Mr. Pearson described that evolution of these proposals as being such that he had never been involved in a scheme where matters had been gone into in such depth. They were, he said, tested to destruction, and you may recall that. And so others, as I hope you also recall, have borne that out. So turning then to the first of my 10 points, and this is the crying out point in terms of the need for development on the site. So the need for the sites to be developed was indeed the clear message from both supporters and indeed, to be fair, many of the opponents of the proposals. No one disagreed with the principle of the development of the two sites and indeed the urgency for it. And although objectors are unhappy with a tall building on the island site, and Mrs. Hearn, I think on the first day, referred to that as the main sticking point, the proposals for the church and the other community facilities seem to be largely and understandably fully supported by very many. And I think so that's consistent with what Mr. King has just said to you in closing on behalf of the Rule 6 parties. And the two sites are currently only contributing in a negative way to the townscape character and to the setting of the heritage assets. The so far lost opportunity for such a key, previously developed and sustainable site is obvious. There is, however, with these proposals, the opportunity to address the vastness, as Mr. Lacavara referred to it in his evidence, of the gyratory system. That is in the design terms, as well as delivering a highly desirable mix of uses in accordance with the emerging local plan proposals, and that's CLP2. So, of course, the policy prerogative, and this is an important matter to make, is not just redevelopment of such a site. It is optimal redevelopment that should be sought and achieved. Because making optimal use of vacant and underused previously developed land by appropriate intensification is an ever-increasing theme at all levels of policy, including, of course, the London Plan. It is hardly surprising, therefore, that the GLA strongly supports, to quote, the regeneration of this key town centre site. And it should not be thought, even insofar as it could be relevant to consideration of the current proposals, that there is some ready alternative that is likely to come forward and be viable and deliverable. The lengthy and extensive efforts that the applicants have gone to, together with the unimplemented 2011 planning permission, demonstrate that any suggestion that there is such an alternative to the current proposals needs to be treated with extreme caution. And so, as you will have heard, the applicant's evidence makes that very clear. So secondly, turn to the PTAL context, the high accessibility. So no one at the inquiry has disputed the excellent transport accessibility of the site, and indeed Mr. Charles King considered that the applicants, and this was in his opening statement and in cross-examination of the highways witnesses, has underplayed the excellence of the bus service, particularly along the Brighton Road. There was some consideration of exactly where the trains go to and from, and the splitting of trains at Purley, as you may recall, explaining the number of services. However, none of that in any way undermined the undisputed benefits and opportunities for sustainable development arising from the site's location in that respect in terms of sustainable development. So, and that's in accordance with paragraphs 30, 32 and 33 in particular of the framework. I don't go to those, sir, but you'll be well aware of what they refer to, encouraging sustainable transport. So that accessibility and the pivotal location of the site, including its location partly within and partly adjacent to the district centre, strongly point to the potential for development of a high density to optimise the development in accordance with national and local policy, including the London Plan referred to above. So this is a policy-consistent opportunity shouting out to be taken. Sites with high levels of PTAL, especially where within town centres, are highlighted for intensification and low-level parking or parking-free developments. And thirdly, sir, turning to the position on the adopted and emerging local plans, again by reference to your inquiry issues, so the plan-led and plan accordance credentials of the proposals, run deep. They really do, sir. The proposals are in accordance with the development plan as a whole. The island site is allocated by proposal H85, and that's under policy H3(2) of the Croydon local plan. That's the UDP save policies. And again, you've got the full reference for that. And so that's allocated for mixed use development comprising community uses, a significant residential element and shopping. The community services policies in the saved replacement UDP again expressly include places of worship, and that's consistent, as you pointed out, so with paragraph 70 of the framework. And SP 5.6 of CLP1 states that the council will support and enable the provision and improvement of places of worship, and that's carried through, as you will see from Mr. White's note, which you asked for and have been given, sir, in CLP 1.1. So I hope that makes the position regarding churches clear at the local level. In terms of specific uses, both the island site and the south site, as you'll be well aware now, are allocated in the emerging detailed policies and proposals, CLP2. The island site, of course, for the new church, community facility and residential, and the south site for 77 to 100 homes. So that's all well familiar to the inquiry. And although not site-specific, also familiar to the inquiry, of course, is policy DM44 of CLP2, the emerging CLP2, and that states that within the district centre and its environs, development should complement the existing predominant building heights of 3 to 8 stories with a potential for a new development of up to a maximum of 16 stories. So the basis for that approach is set out in Mr. Lacavara's evidence. And that specific identification of Purley is significant and needs to be considered alongside policy SP 4.5 of the adopted local plan, that's the 2013 local plan, CLP1, and of course that identifies district centres for the encouragement of tall buildings. So these emerging policies should be given significant weight now, although adoption would of course make them part of the development plan for the purpose of section 38(6) of the 2004 Act. And I just pause there so you have, with the statement of common ground in Mr. White's evidence and others, where that comes from and the position of the council on that. So, but in that context, therefore, existing and emerging policy strongly supports the principle of a tall building in Purley, and it is no part, it should be noted, of any objector's case that there is a more appropriate site in Purley than the application site for a tall building. Mr. Lacavara also confirmed that the potential for a tall building then for 14 stories, as you'll recall, in Purley, was included as long ago as 2013. So this isn't something recent, just thrust upon everyone. It has a long gestation period. This had increased to 16 stories by November 2015, that's prior to the current planning application, and was 16 stories in the submitted CLP2, as you will be very well aware. And it should also be noted that the Mayor sees tall buildings as continuing to play a role in the future of London, where they can add to the existing community. And so, as we hope you'll be able to find in due course, the proposals will certainly do that, and they will do so, we say, exceedingly well. So that takes me to the next stage, and is linked with this, and that next point, and that's relating to the important planning objectives that these proposals would deliver. So, as stated in opening, whilst objectors highlight what they see as the negatives of the development, there can be no real dispute that this development would deliver an impressive array of benefits. And I note Mr. King very fairly in his 18.2 expressly and explicitly acknowledges the scheme does have many good parts. And that is very fair of him, and if I may say so, correct in terms of the evidence. And turning back to my paragraph 20, and linked to that, but following the evidence, I acknowledged on the evidence that the Rule 6 residents' associations and other objectors have fairly recognised many of the benefits of the proposals, and that's through the inquiry, as well as in closing. And although the opposition to the 17-storey element remains, of course, hopefully many objectors might now understand more the force behind the proposals in terms of what they would actually deliver. Further, underpinning many of the questions asked by much of the evidence given by objectors was an assumption that significant benefits could be delivered by some alternative without the 17-storey element. However, as it became clear, some possible alternative is, of course, not relevant. There is no alternative proposal before this inquiry, or to be considered by yourself or the Secretary of State. The correct approach to applying Section 38(6) to the proposals is to consider whether they are themselves acceptable, having regard to the development plan and to any other material considerations, which of course includes the emerging policies and national policy guidance. And guidance, I should say. And it's, if the proposals are considered acceptable on that approach, as we strongly contend that they are, the existence of some alternative as a matter of law is as a matter of law not material to the determination of this application. And so for the avoidance of doubt, that would be so even if an alternative were preferable in some respects. And we don't accept that, but even if it were so, I'll make that absolutely clear, that's our position. So if that were not the legal position, nonetheless, the reliance on some unspecified possible future alternative would be simply unrealistic. And that is particularly so given the pressing need for housing and the community facilities, including the needs for the church itself. The history of the site and the apparent lack of viability of the previous and now expired permission can but highlight the huge opportunities presented by the current proposals. Little in relation to development can be guaranteed, but it has to be said that the current applicants have acted throughout in a way that is highly unusual, if not unique, in terms of the willingness not only to provide, but to actually deliver an undoubtedly first-class scheme. One of the many examples of that is the inclusion within the legal agreement, as you'll be familiar with, of a retention of existing scheme architect, and the covenant for that, and that's been amended, as you know, sir. Cooperation, going the extra distance, and excellence, it can genuinely be said, have been the refreshing hallmarks of these proposals. And this is further evidenced by the convincing responses from the applicants to all the points that have been raised during the inquiry, so including your own points, and been extensive information given to you, which I hope gives you confidence that all those matters have been properly and previously considered. So also, and it needs to be borne in mind, and this has been touched upon, but I hope you'll forgive me for mentioning it again, because I think it's important. An alternative scheme could also depart from much of the adopted and emerging development plan, because in fact moving the church to the south side would not be in accordance with either emerging allocations in CLP2, which I have set out above. There is no express local policy support for the church and other community facilities on the south side, and that's unlike, of course, the island side. Moreover, as Mr. Pearson made clear, there is much logic in the approach in the adopted and emerging plan. The church would be outside the district centre if it was placed on the south side. Active frontages would be lost from the centre. There is also the position of Eldon Housing that has an interest in the site, and you've been given the south side, the details you've been given. And turning to the position of the church use, that, as we say it, is clear. Reverend Collins described the shortcomings of the existing facilities, of which there can be little doubt. The scope of the community facilities that would be available to the public through the development in any event merits very great weight. And so you have understandably and properly, if I may say so, sought to test the substance of this, and Reverend Collins and Mr. Pearson have clarified and confirmed the position in the documents that you have and in oral evidence. The community benefits, we would suggest, have in no way been overstated, particularly when one considers all that information. So the commitment to the scheme, financial and otherwise, by the church and its members, and you know about the £4 million, which wouldn't be repaid as part of the development agreement, is also beyond doubt and admirable. The growth of the facilities and the church would be for the wider benefit of the town, with Reverend Collins' community visions being laudable. So the clarification from the applicants has made it clear, therefore, beyond any possible doubt, as we, with respect, had always understood from our side, that this is not in any sense a money-making exercise by the church, and they would donate land, of course, for social land and land for TFL, the safeguarding land. So just turning back to our evidence, because if any more convincing was actually required on the community benefits that could actually be achieved from the new facilities, that was provided by the evidence of the case officer, Mr. White, as we would suggest. His evidence, which came from apart from his involvement as a case officer, you recall him referring to his numerous unannounced visits. So that was compelling, I would suggest, on the existing and future benefit to the local community, including the youth, an often overlooked group, as others have mentioned. So he was clearly impressed by the current use and reach, even under the palpable constraints, as explained by Reverend Collins and confirmed by others, including some of the supporters you heard yesterday. And as Mr. White pointed out, this was an unstaged, as I said, unannounced, unstaged. It was also worth emphasising what was made clear again yesterday afternoon by Deborah Baggott, that all the community facilities, apart from the office area and prayer room, will be open for use by the local community. There will therefore be no dedicated church as such. At the same time, the use of such a well-located brownfield site for making a meaningful contribution to housing, that's both market, the 181, and affordable units, 39, is very significant. This, of course, will make an important contribution to the borough-wide needs that have to be met, and the urgency required in meeting the housing need and the difficulties in finding appropriate sites in the borough rang out loudly from Councillor Scott's evidence yesterday. So the housing mix for both the market and affordable elements will be entirely appropriate given the nature of the location, and that was addressed in Mr. White's evidence. Although the affordable housing is below the policy target figures, a higher level is not supported by the viability, as the Council's independent advisors have confirmed. So policy does not require more than that can be achieved viably, and the matters raised by yourself have been addressed by the viability experts, including the letter you've just been handed from our experts, confirming the position that's already been put to you. So once you had a chance to digest that properly, I know you've been looking through them, but I hope you'll be able to conclude, as we suggest, that this demonstrates that the conclusion drawn over viability is robust. And I would highlight it's therefore not surprising that the Mayor has accepted the level of affordable housing is consistent with the viability, and in doing so he took into account his then draft SPG, which the Rule 6 Residents Association had referred to and relied upon, And it should be emphasised, as it has been made clear to the inquiry, that the Mayor had in place at the time of consideration of the proposals the new unit, which had also assessed their viability. You may recall the reference to that, and the applicants dealt with that. So nonetheless, putting that aside, 39 units of affordable housing is not insignificant and will itself in any event make a very important contribution in Purley, as the evidence makes clear. There is also, of course, the review mechanism in the legal agreement. And you have that, and you also have the example of that with Mr. White, and where that's been used. It's in my footnote, 33, but I just mentioned that one, where that's been used successfully by the council, which you asked for an example. So I hope that puts some flesh on the bones of that. So it cannot be said that there was any lack of enthusiasm for affordable housing on the part of the applicants or council. The council encouraged the use of the south side, as you will have heard, in order that affordable housing could be delivered. However, there is nothing in the policies that suggests that one should remove elements of the mixed use identified in the adopted and emerging local plan to make it affordable housing policy compliant. And indeed, I point out that the Mayor accepted the reduced affordable housing, if I can call it that, recognising the policy requirement, expressly recognising the policy requirement for re-provision of community facilities. So the development would also, and inevitably, I should say, add activity in the district centre, with the important benefits of that. It will have an active frontage, including a shop unit, which will be a distinct qualitative improvement over the units it replaces. I think that's 4, if I recall correctly, and should be attractive to an occupier. Mr. Pearson's evidence supported what seems inevitable to us with his cogent indication of the potential increase in vitality and viability. You remember he gave you the figures there, and I give you the reference to that, but that's what I'm referring to there.
Thank you.
So there is likely to be significant direct and spin-off benefits in that context. And as Mr. Pearson endorsed, and I think is fairly clear, the centre is struggling. It suffers from the road network and the divorced nature of Tesco, which is an important part of the district centre. The proposals are supported themselves by the organisation that speaks for local businesses, that's the Purley Bid. Mr. Cripps, yesterday, when he was speaking, he provided further convincing support for the benefits that would arise for the centre. And as Mr. Pearson had said, and we very strongly support, the development can only benefit the centre. So in addition, and not to be forgotten, there are the economic benefits from the construction, with the local employment training strategy assisting local people, and there will be the continuing employment from the church and other facilities. So I turn now, sir, essentially to the compliance with the plan, and in particular the design issue, which has been the major issue at the inquiry raised by objectors. So the first point to make is the accordance of the proposals with the development plan and emerging local plan has been thoroughly assessed in Mr. White's evidence. You have that and you see that, so I don't labour it now, but I would suggest that such a detailed, conscientious and convincing assessment is unusual. And this addresses in particular, of course, the Secretary of State and your issue A, and we've sought to do that, as I say, in detail. But for the purpose of these submissions, sir, with regards specifically to the design, the importance of good design is clear from the MPPF and reflected in the relevant development plan policies, as detailed in both Mr. White's and Mr. Lacavara's evidence. A detailed assessment of the proposals against paragraph 58 of the framework is provided in Mr. Lacavara's proof, as we identified in his evidence in chief, and he has fully explained the Council's assessment of the design of the proposals. So it's not necessary to rehearse this in detail at this stage, but as the inquiry progressed, it became even clearer that criticisms of the design of the scheme related nearly always to the tower element of the scheme. For example, Mr. Philp expressly stated that he had no problem with the design of the south side. There was some criticism, you will recall, sir, probably from objecting interested parties, certainly one yesterday, in terms of the south site, but I do with respect say that's a little substance in terms of the actual design, which we consider itself to be certainly of high quality, and I refer you to the evidence of Mr. Lacavara in his proof of evidence. So given the number of objections overall, a notable feature of this inquiry is the limited nature of the design objections even to the island site proposals. So these relate very largely, the objections there are, simply to the 17-storey element on that part of the site. And even with regard to that element, the actual criticisms of this were mostly limited in scope in that the following, and I'll make the following points if I may. So firstly, the criticisms were based on the townscape impact, with regard in particular to it being much taller, the tower being much taller than existing buildings and not relating to its surroundings. The reliance on the policies requiring that development respects or relates to the existing townscape does not demonstrate the unacceptability of the proposals. The policies have to be read as a whole. They do not, as Mr. Lacavara explained, require that development necessarily closely resembles or is similar to that which exists. That would be generally so, but even more where the existing and emerging local plan refers to tall buildings in district centres and in Purley specifically. So, sir, such policies do not preclude excuse me, a tall building in a centre where there are presently none. And indeed, they have to be read and applied, policies relied upon by objectors, CLP1, Policy SP 4.5 and Policy DM 44, all of which I have addressed you on above. So next, Mr. Filt specifically relied upon Policy 7.7 of the London Plan. Mr. Lacavara has assessed the proposals convincingly against the policy to demonstrate how they would satisfy the stated criteria and approach. And again, sir, I give you the reference to that, but don't repeat it. May I just highlight this, however, that's how the proposals would significantly improve the legibility of this area in accordance with Policy 77C. So thirdly, nor should the policies be applied in a way that would preclude outstanding or innovative designs which help raise the standard of design more generally in the area. And that's specifically clear from paragraph 63 of the framework. So in terms of relating and respecting, the proposals need to be looked at as a whole. They do call on local features and materials which have inspired the design and approach and details, as Mr. Matthews and Mr. Noble made clear, and which Mr. Lacavara has recognised. Excuse me. Also, so by placing the single, slender, taller element in one location on the island site, adjacent to the gyratory, at the lowest point, well within the district centre end of the High Street, the remainder of the site can be lower, for example on Banstead Road, and reflect some of the scale, proportions and rhythm of the more suburban hinterland. And in that way, the proposals step down as one moves away from the Brighton Road. You may recall the suggestion or the view yesterday by Councillor Pollard, where I think he referred to massing and tunnelling as it goes up the hill, so you will make your own judgment on that, but I would suggest that ignores the sensitive and sensible design approach of stepping down, as I've just referred to. So further, the rationale for the tall building in this location is compelling. It would negotiate the very large and inhospitable gyratory, and I would, if I may, draw contrast with that with Mr. Gibson's comment yesterday, you may recall, of farewell town, welcome countryside. We would say not much countryside perceived on the gyratory. So it would not disrupt the peace of Purley that Mr. Filt referred to, as its location is very much in the transitional but urban part of the settlement. Very few, if any, telltale symptoms arise from the tall element, and very few were referred to and relied upon. For example, impact on daylight and sunlight, outlook, privacy, substandard units, housing mix. So you would expect if there were problems with the tall or the density that these would be difficulties. But the proposals have been very carefully designed and assessed in that regard and are entirely satisfactory in respect of these factors as I summarised below. So one aspect specifically relied upon by the Rule 6 Residents Association was overshadowing of the district centre. However, as the applicants pointed out, that aspect has been assessed, in terms of overshadowing, has been assessed in the applicant's supporting studies and found to be satisfactory. So this lack of telltale signs is also relevant to the reliance objectives placed on the density of the development being higher than that indicated in Table 3.2 of the London Plan. And you may recall reference to that in Lynn Hale yesterday, that the density figures in the London Plan are to protect the amenity of existing residents. And I'll address that below, but there's no difficulty in those respects. And finally on this, in terms of any concerns regarding the fire risk for a tall building, I'll just deal with that here. So this can be addressed by the use of sprinklers as confirmed in the applicant's supplementary points, and you have a suggested condition on that. And the issue of water pressure has, raised by Mr. King has also been addressed, and you have a document reference to that. So with regard to the detailed design, there were originally some criticisms made of some limited aspects. For example, the Rule 6 Statement of Case, the December one, the fuller one if you recall, referred to bog standard fenestration. That, in fact, was not supported by Mr. Dennis King, who was a retired architect, and indeed Mr. D. King, Mr. Dennis King's criticism of the tower itself solely related to its height. He very fairly had no hesitation in commending the architects and the excellent design. He distanced himself from that criticism and from the suggestion by Mr. King, the other Mr. King that is, it is not a particularly great design. So this puts into context the comments of interested parties objecting yesterday, and you may recall a reference to exceptionally ugly, and the comments of, that's Mr. Davis and Mr. Robertson, comparing the proposals to the 1960s tower blocks. It's a matter for you, sir, but we do say such comments do not reflect the actual proposals and the quality of them. So the design approach utilising a tall building has achieved significant support not only from the council, but from the GLA, as I've already referred to, and Design for the South East. So the Design South East recognised the suitability of a tower to address the gyratory and indeed considered the possibility of it being taller. And as Mr. Lacavara explained, Design South East's comments have been appropriately addressed and there was no requirement or need to refer back to them. And in particular, as Mr. Matthews also referred to, the reduction of the height of the campanile and increased height helped with the slenderness of the building and enhancing its landmark role. Mr. Noble stated that by lowering the campanile element, that this has also very much strengthened the building and the light appearance, resulting in a very elegant contribution. So I hope you are able to conclude that Mr. Lacavara's assessment is comprehensive and convincing. Similarly, Mr. Matthews and Mr. Noble's evidence spoke volumes of the carefully considered and highly successful design approach. The high visibility of the site allows for the building to fulfil a landmark role in a manner that signposts the district centre from a good distance around it. It does that without impinging on any designated views. The reliance of Mr. Philp, the MP, and others on the view from Farthing Hills was shown to be incorrect, as it was not actually the designated view that was being referred to. And as one drops down the slope where Mr. Philp's viewpoint was from, that is no longer the designated panorama, however, as was set out in the Croydon Local Plan Proposals map. And as Mr. Noble said, it seems highly unlikely that you would see more as you descend the ridge. There's a quarry with houses and trees, I think we referred to. Mr. Lacavara confirmed, when he gave his evidence, that he agreed with that. And in any event, sir, I'll just emphasise, seeing the development in no way in itself makes it unacceptable. So this building is designed to be seen, of course, but in the right way and from appropriate locations. This enables it to perform the identified functions Many respected buildings are much taller than their surroundings, as Mr. Noble told the inquiry, and he made reference to Lincoln Cathedral and Liverpool, and he referred to an even greater contrast in those towns and made reference to Lincoln. So, in terms of the theatre, that is. So the views to the site and the topography allow the taller element of the development to be placed on the lower part of the site and yet have appropriate visibility. As both Mr. Noble's and Mr. Lacavara's evidence emphasise, the development has a clear associative collective value, a family value I think was referred to, both on the island site and within the south side, and are anchored very much to Purley itself. And further, contrary to Mr. Philp's assertion, there would be a very appropriate and indeed commendable public realm, including the entrance square, as I call it, on Russell Hill Road, and the landscaping. And compared to the existing position, it would be an enormous improvement, and I use my word advisedly. Within the context of the proposals, it would be entirely appropriate. The quantum of public realm available, so if you need any details, is of course seen from Plan 4 in the legal agreement, which was pointed out earlier on in the inquiry. In addition, the trees in the crown element, if I can turn to that of the tower, would be an innovative embellishment to the proposals. As Mr. Lacavara made clear, the acceptability of the design does not hinge upon those trees, although they would have an important element. Contrary to assertions from objectors, they would be visible, as explained by Mr. Matthews, and their permanence physically would be secured by proposed condition 6.2. So the council, as Mr. Lacavara explained, and it's important I point this out, had sought more details on that proposed planting in order to satisfy the council that it would be successful. So like other aspects of this scheme, they have been robustly considered by the applicants and assessed by the council, and there should be more than adequate confidence that this element would be delivered and retained successfully. So finally, just turning to density, if I may, I'm not going to dwell on this because you heard a lot about density, but if these overall merits of the design are accepted, the issue of density should not be of any concerns. However, the density figures in Table 3.2 of the London Plan are not a ceiling in any sense and are expressly not to be applied mechanistically. So they are often exceeded, as the applicants have pointed out, and often exceeded in successful developments, that is. So the need for flexibility and indeed for higher densities, particularly for sites with higher levels of public transport, such as this site, is becoming more and more important. Put simply, if the design and all other aspects of the development are considered to be acceptable, then density should be applied flexibly, and it is not an impediment to the development. Indeed, the extent of use achieved in such a highly successful way should be commended. So I turn from design in the townscape sense to deal more briefly with the design with regard to the existing heritage assets. And so I do more briefly, not because it's not important, we're fully aware of that, but we dealt with it very extensively in the evidence. And clearly it wasn't the main topic of the inquiry, although it's of course very important to yourself and the Secretary of State. So there would, of course, a starting point, stating the obvious, but the importantly obvious, there would be no loss of any heritage assets, designated or non-designated. And arising from that or otherwise, there can be no question of any significant impact on any heritage asset as meant by the framework. The impact on the setting of the heritage assets, and in particular the Grade 2 listed library, has been fully assessed in accordance with Section 66 of the Listed Building and Conservation Areas Act. The Council considers, as you have heard detailed, that there would be a degree of harm amounting to less than substantial harm to the setting of the library as detailed by Mr. Lacavara. So, however, that is clearly outweighed by other considerations as detailed by both Mr. Lacavara and Mr. White and confirmed in their oral evidence. And one thing I would point out, sir, is that paragraph 134 of the framework advises, as you will be familiar, that where a development proposal will lead to less than substantial harm to the significance of a designated heritage asset, this harm should be weighed against the public benefits of the proposal and I emphasise, including securing its optimum viable use. That is important and relevant guidance. So Mr. Lacavara has also carefully and robustly assessed the impacts on the non-designated heritage assets, including 960 Brighton Road, which Mr. King has specifically referred to in his closing. So notwithstanding the clear change to aspects on the setting of these, any harm is modest and does not have the benefit of the Section 66 statutory special weight in the balancing exercise. But it has been fully taken into account. And so finally on this, overall there would be a very significant enhancement in the townscape character generally and with regard to the setting of the relevant heritage assets. The quality of the townscape that would result compared to the existing and very long-standing state of the site far exceeds the relatively minor harm to the heritage assets. I turn now to my point 7, that is the acceptability of the proposals with regard to the living conditions for the new occupiers. And to the best of my recollection and reading of all the myriad of objections, sir, and if you spotted them, I'm sure you'll take it into account, but no one has challenged the acceptability of the new homes in terms of internal space, certainly not in any substantive way, noise and sunlight, daylight, as detailed by Mr. White. And Mr. White explained in his proof and oral evidence the acceptability in terms of amenity provision, and I don't dwell on that anymore, but you have the evidence. With regard to air quality, the air quality assessment and Mr. Simmons' evidence recognises the existing conditions, of course. Design measures will ensure that the residential occupiers of the lower floors of the buildings, which are affected by these conditions, are adequately protected. And with regard to the community use areas, which was explored by yourself with Mr. Simmons, this will be addressed by the use of mechanical ventilation, as confirmed by the applicants in their supplementary note. And you got confirmation of the conditions regarding that this afternoon as well, so you asked for that. And this is secured, therefore, by that condition, and I think that is clear. So Mr. White has also provided an example of where this has been used, as you requested, I believe, and in respect of the entrance square in Russell Hill Road, users will generally be passing through that and certainly not likely to be staying there any length of time. So with regard, turning to flooding, with regard to any flooding risk to the site, this has been addressed adequately in the scheme and the appropriate body considers the proposal to be acceptable in this respect. Appropriate measures to ensure that the occupants would be adequately protected in terms of any flood risk have been incorporated into the scheme as the applicant's consultant, Mr. Linardatos, confirmed. And again, I give you the necessary references. Turning, sir, to the impact on existing occupiers. Again, Mr. White's evidence explains why the proposals would not have any unacceptable impact on neighbouring occupiers in terms of privacy, visual intrusion, daylight and sunlight, and noise and disturbance. There was no challenge, again to the best of my recollection, on any of those aspects. There has in fact been very little reliance on any such objections. I think one example I can think of, and one exception, was from Mr. Param yesterday, sir, when he said that the development would affect the privacy of the neighbourhood, if you recall, privacy in back gardens. So you will of course judge that, but that is certainly not borne out by what I would suggest is Mr. White's careful assessment. And you remember you have photographs and diagrams in his appendices showing how he's looked at the area carefully. So further, the development would not have any unacceptable implications in terms of air quality, wind and flooding. Indeed, there would be improvement in respect of flooding, as referred to below, and in terms of wind conditions. With regard to air quality, as Mr. Simmons made clear, the development would not cause any exceedances of any EU or other standards. The robustness and conservative nature of the air quality assessment was referred to by Mr. Simmons and has been confirmed by the applicant's consultant. There are existing exceedances in terms of nitrogen dioxide, but any increase in these would be marginal, and you have more details of that in those documents. So there is no existing or resulting, as I say, exceeding of any relevant UK or European levels in relation either to PM10s or PM2.5s, a particular matter. And the World Health Organization levels, which the Rule 6 residents associations rely upon, are not applied in the UK. And that has been addressed by Mr. Simmons and by the applicants. So further, the site is of course allocated for development, and everyone wishes to see development on it. And I think I can say everyone advisedly there, given what you've heard at the inquiry. However, appropriate measures should and will be included to address the conditions. These include the use of idling patrols aimed at parked vehicles with their engines left running, which is prevented automatically in more modern vehicles, but certainly not all vehicles and the older ones. Croydon is to be commended. I think Mr. King took a similar point, to be fair to him. Commended for the introduction of this then innovative measure, and that was back in 2005, Mr. Simmons told us. It is clearly actively enforced, as Mr. Simmons also made clear. I should just point out, though, in the light of what Mr. King said, the £6,000 contribution required under the legal agreement will be used to ensure that there are resources to police the site and surrounding, as Mr. Simmons, if I recall correctly, confirmed to the inquiry. Further, Sir, electric charging points will be provided, and again, as Mr. Simmons stated, advances in technology should result in there being continuing improvements in emissions from vehicles, even before use of electric vehicles becomes more widespread. So turning to flooding, with regard to existing flooding problems in the area, which is an understandable concern of residents, Mr. Linardatos detailed how the proposals would actually reduce the risk of flooding elsewhere, as the existing water just runs straight to the public sewer. This leads to flash flooding from surface water, but with the development, water will be stored on site in a tank and released slowly into the sewers, which will result in a massive improvement, to use his words. Mr. Linardatos also made it clear that the flooding in the underpass was a different issue, as that area is used to reduce the risk of flooding elsewhere. He said, that, if I recall correctly, that this would also be reduced as it would benefit from the local drainage network. So turning to my penultimate point and issue, that is the one of highways and parking. So there is no highways objection from the Highways Authority for the A23 Brighton Road, Banstead Road and Russell Hill Road. That's TfL, of course. Local objectors nonetheless expressed concern regarding the impact on the busy highway network by increased traffic, as well as the lack of parking. The proposed accesses have been carefully audited and the impact on pedestrian safety fully taken into account. The additional pedestrian activity will be safely accommodated on the existing crossings and will be an undoubted benefit to the district centre. The impact on the highway network from the additional traffic from the development will be small, as Mr. Burton made clear. It would only lead to a less than 0.5% increase in the two-way traffic per day, which Mr. King accepted, and there's no dispute on that. Mr. King's remaining concern in this respect related to the position of the exit access on the Russell Hill Road and the crossing the Gyratory. However, this will happen at slow speeds, and the negligible additional traffic will not add unacceptably to the congestion. The crossing of lanes will continue as now, as both Ms. Balboa and Mr. Burton emphasised, is the very nature of a gyratory. The accident record understandably caused no particular concern, and I don't mean that flippantly because all accidents are of concern, but it didn't cause any particular concern to either Ms. Balboa or Mr. Burton, and indeed, as Mr. Burton pointed out, the figures given by Mr. King indicated an improvement to the accident record. The possibility of an alternative access is not relevant to whether the proposed access is acceptable. So I've addressed on alternatives above, but it's the same point. However, Mr. Burton also pointed out, for the avoidance of doubt, that an access on Banstead Road would have its own problems. So there is appropriate provision proposed for servicing and deliveries to both sites, to ensure that there will be no unacceptable difficulties. As you are familiar, a delivery and servicing plan is provided for by the conditions, as Mr. Burton pointed out. Mr. King's concern over white van deliveries should therefore not cause any unacceptable problems. So with regard to the restricted parking provision, this is appropriate and indeed an opportunity not to be missed, given the high PTAL and the good local rail and bus services. Again, as Mr. Burton emphasised, this approach is consistent not just with the National Planning Policy Framework and the London Plan, but also the local plan policy. It is entirely policy consistent. It will ensure that the use of sustainable means of transport is maximised, consistent with the framework. This constrained provision is backed by the restriction on the ability of any future resident to apply for a parking permit. Mr. White told the inspector that such a restriction has been successfully enforced in the borough. That's in the additional note you have. The lawfulness of this under Section 16 of the Greater London General Powers Act was confirmed, as you've already been told, by the Court of Appeal in May 2017, and I give the reference for completeness. And so this restriction on parking will be reinforced by the travel plan and car club. So you raised the point about the provision for the car club, but that meets what has been assessed by the likely operator, as you were told, and as Mr. Burton confirmed to you, sir, there would be the ability to make provision for further spaces if these prove to be required. And I think you may have a look at that today, but certainly you indicated you would, so I'll leave that matter with you, sir, of course. Both Miss Balboa and Mr. Burton were rightly confident that any resident of the proposed housing would be unlikely to want to seek to park on street, and as Miss Balboa spelled out, the difficulties that would cause convincingly support that position. This is further supported by Mr. Cunningham's experience of parking spaces remaining unpurchased. An additional support for this was also provided by the local agent, Mr. Gershon, who yesterday was able to back up the attitude of many purchasers to the need for parking. So with regard to the church use, the 50 spaces will be provided, and in times of high demand, which relates in particular to Sunday services, management measures will ensure that no unacceptable problems arise, and there will be available additional parking in the locality, as explained by Mr. Burton, in relation to the proposed condition for the car parking management plan. This can ensure, if necessary, that there is a spread of exiting from the car park. And you also have, I think, the additional note, which includes Reverend Collins confirming that at the conclusion of a Sunday service, members do not all depart at the same time, and I believe you were told that as well. So that would also be true of any weekday activities, although the car park demand for those is likely to be much less. There is reliance, as you know, on 2 existing car parks to assist in accommodating the parking demand for the Sunday service. There seems no dispute that there is currently ample spare capacity in these, so the leisure facilities site proposals in the emerging local plan expressly includes the requirement for public car parking, so this can be relied upon. The Russell Hill Place car park is not a proposal site, and there are no redevelopment proposals for it, but in either case, the local planning authority, in considering any application for redevelopment of either site, would have to take into account the contribution of existing parking to the town centre requirements and take into account any implications for that. So the objector's contention for more parking is not, we say, consistent with the policy. The argument that greater parking is required to give choice to residents is not consistent with the MPPF when one looks at the overall policies, and indeed the objector's contention for greater parking also seems, with respect, to be out of step with the desire for less congestion. And finally, it should not be overlooked, and I know you won't overlook it, sir, that the development would safeguard an area of land for TfL at the junction of Russell Hill Road and Brighton Road if this is required in due course for junction improvements. And I, sir, finally and briefly, in terms of the overall assessment, you've had many overall assessments in the evidence, so I can keep mine very brief. And just to tie things together, I'd just like to say the following matters, to cover the following matters, sir. We should not lose sight of the fact that local planning authorities are actually told in the framework that they should work proactively with applicants to secure developments that improve the economic, social and environmental conditions of the area. This scheme would deliver all 3, and it does so with an excellent overall design and accords with the adopted and emerging local plan. I do say the objectors, and in particular the Rule 6 residents' associations, are to be commended and respected for the manner and courtesy, if I can add, in which they presented their arguments. Their concerns are understood, but we believe have been fully addressed. However, all the officers who gave evidence had patently carefully considered all relevant aspects of the scheme in what is a challenging urban environment. And indeed, both Mr. Lacavara and Mr. White testified to the all-round excellence of the scheme. And it's hardly surprising that Mr. White told the Enquiry that he has never come across a scheme like this and the very great benefits it would deliver to the people of Purley. Mr. Lacavara was able to say that it is a scheme of rare quality for Croydon and one of the finest he came across through the planning process in the 14 years that he has worked at the council. He believes that it will be an asset to the people of Purley and a reason for future pride. Accordingly, sir, we consider this to be genuinely and unusually a splendid scheme which we hope you and the Secretary of State are able in due course to agree is too good an opportunity to be missed. So those are my submissions, unless there's anything you want me to deal with.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan.
Thank you very much.
We'll take a break now until 20 past. The inquiry is adjourned. all take your seats, please? The inquiry is resumed. Mr. Katkowski, your closing submissions, please.
Indeed, it's just being circulated now.
Thank you.
So you have a single-sided copy and a bulldog clip because I think the staple was just about to expire.
Okay.
So this is document 29. So just while it's being distributed, just a tiny point, so nothing to do with the closing submissions. You might remember yesterday that I gave you a reference for where you will find area schedules for the application scheme, and I gave you various page references in the design and access statement. Those page references are right, and they all relate to the proposals on the island site. I omitted to give you the reference for the south site, and so that is the DAS, core document 1.10, at page 204.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much indeed.
And Mr. White has just circulated the final version of the conditions, which is document 7D.
7D.
You got
Excellent.
that.
I must make a note of that. Thank you, sir. What's that? Good. So without any further ado, I shall make the applicant's closing submissions by reading out that which you have in front of you. So by way of introduction, throughout the careful evolution of the application scheme, the applicants have at all times sought to take their lead from the development plan, the proposed mix of uses, the disposition of those uses across the site, and the form of the scheme all take their lead from and are given strong support by the development plan. This plan-led approach has led to the unsurprising outcome that the plan makers, namely the Greater London Authority, the Mayor for the London Plan, and Croydon Council for the local plan, both agree with the applicants in concluding that the scheme accords with the development plan, and so in turn each strongly supports the application. This means that the presumption in favour of the development plan that is provided for by section 38 subsection 6 of the 2004 Act amounts in this matter to a strong presumption in favour of approving the scheme. This is all the more so when one considers the other material considerations in play, which almost entirely act only to support the grant of permission. Included amongst these material considerations are the very real public benefits that the scheme would deliver, as well as the outstanding design quality that all of the main parties agree has been achieved. The applicant's section 38(6) case is that the determination which would be in accordance with the development plan would be to grant planning permission. Material considerations do not indicate otherwise. In addressing the matters referred to by the Secretary of State when he called in the application and your main issues, sir, these submissions follow the approach required by the statute. There is a fundamental point in play here, namely that when it comes to the issues raised by the Rule 6 parties and other objectors, the first port of call must be to see what the development plan has to say about each issue in turn. It is the applicant's case that when this is done, the proposals accord with the relevant policies. In other words, once the points of objection are tested against the development plan, they are found to be misplaced. This is the reason why I asked the Rule 6 parties whether their points were based on allegations that thereby there were breaches of the development plan. The answer was that apart from London Plan Policy 7.7 in respect to the tall building element of the proposals, the Rule 6 parties do not argue that there would be breaches of the relevant policies. This is important. And so, sir, I begin as one must with the development plan. By the time of the Secretary of State's decision in this matter, the development plan will include both the Croydon Local Plan Strategic Policies Partial Review, or CLP 1.1 as it's been dubbed, and the Croydon Local Plan Detailed Policies and Proposals, CLP 2. The applicant's closing proceeds on this assumption, and that in consequence the plan will be as up to date as it possibly could be. So we just footnote that in any event the emerging policies, whilst they're still emerging, should be given significant weight. paragraph 7, as set out above, the applicant's overall submission is that the proposed scheme accords with the development plan when read as a whole. That is, in respect of matters relating to the uses proposed, the disposition of those uses, the form of the scheme, the design and density of the scheme, the provision of affordable housing, as well as a host of other technical matters, there is overall compliance with the development plan. By the end of the inquiry, it was clear that the Rule 6 parties agreed that there was, in fact, no basis to a large number of the objections that they originally raised. It was accepted, for example, that the detailed design of the scheme was excellent, that there would be flood risk benefits from reduced runoff rates, and there would be benefits to Purley District Centre arising from placing residents from 220 new homes, first typo, new homes right in the heart of and directly next to the district centre. The starting point, so far as the development plan is concerned, is the intended use of the application site. The plan in this regard allocates the island site for a mixed-use redevelopment comprising a new church, community facility and residential, and the south site for residential uses. As with the framework, the development plan treats churches as community facilities, and by policy SP 5.5 seeks to ensure that community facilities be located so as to be accessible to all sections of the community, which the proposals most certainly would be. Self-evidently, the scheme is in complete accordance with the mix and disposition of the uses proposed. Indeed, it is an exact fit, and does exactly what the development plan wants. The church and other community facilities are provided, as required by the plan, on the island site, while the residential uses are provided on both parts of the site, but are the exclusive use on the south site, as required by the site allocation. The church and other community facilities proposed on the island site are within the Purley District Centre and, as all agree, are highly accessible. This disposition of uses in the development plan doesn't come about by accident, as Mr. Matthews explained in our note in response to one of your questions, and I quote, "The Council's own urban design team had undertaken work to identify the island site as a strategic location within the district centre and one that lends itself to a mixed-use scheme. The site is clearly one of the most prominent within the town, a fact established by the analysis done by the Council and design team. It is also important to recognise that the public realm around the island site is of strategic importance, being connected to the library, the gyratory, Russell Hill Road and Banstead Road, as well as sitting at the intersection of two shopping parades. The site also sits at the end of the Brighton Hill shopping parade, which arguably is one of the most important vistas within the town. With all of this in mind, the civic, church and community facilities in the proposed scheme offer a unique opportunity to capitalise on and realise the potential of the island site. These activities and building functions provide an activated public realm and public interface to the built form that simply couldn't be replicated by a purely residential scheme or indeed shopping frontages. The uses proposed by the applicants allow a completely transparent building, a seamless interface between the public realm of the new square and pedestrian areas and the public areas within the building. This will establish the site and public realm as a proper heart of Purley. Clearly then, the allocation of the island site for a mix of uses is a product of careful consideration by the Council and reflects a disposition of uses that would be of most benefit to the existing district centre. Moreover, the proposed uses would provide a significant benefit to the listed Purley Library, which through the development would have much improved links to the town centre and a far better relationship to Banstead Road through the public realm to be provided as part of the development. So the questions raised by you as to the relative weight to be given to the various uses upon the site simply do not arise in determining compliance with the development plan. They are, with respect, the wrong questions to be asked when applying the first part, the first limb of section 38, subsection 6. The only relevant question to ask at this stage, the first limb stage, is whether the proposed uses and their disposition accord with the allocations in the development plan. The answer is that they precisely accord with the allocations and so accord in this important respect with the development plan. Turning next to the form of the development and the inclusion within the scheme of a tall building, this again takes its lead from the development plan. These matters were addressed in cross-examination of the Rule 6 parties and Mr. Philp. The agreed position is that through the policies in the London Plan, and policies 7 and 7A in particular, local planning authorities are encouraged to take a plan-led approach to the provision of tall buildings in their areas. The Council has done its job properly and has followed this lead. We find that this is so, first by looking at policy SP 4.5 of their first plan. It's materially the same in the version pre the modifications. This provides that tall buildings will be encouraged only in specified areas, those areas including district centres. The proposed tall building is of course proposed to be in the district centre. Policy SP 4.5 goes on to say that detailed consideration of the appropriateness of tall buildings in district centres will be contained in CLP2. These aspects of the development plan thus anticipate that there will be a considered process whereby the finer grain analysis of the appropriateness of tall buildings in specific areas or locations will be carried through the successive stages of the development plan. The final manifestation of this approach, so far as the application is concerned, is found in policy DM 44.1b of CLP2. Sorry about all this jargon. This provides specific and clear support for a tall building in Purley District Centre, saying in terms that there is potential for a new landmark of up to a maximum of 16 stories. It was properly agreed by Mr Philp MP that his proposition, and made repeatedly over and over again by the Rule 6 parties and other objectors, that Purley is an inappropriate location for a tall building, is fundamentally inconsistent with the position reached in the development plan that, to the contrary, a tall building is supported in Purley District Centre. Indeed, CLP 1.1 positively encourages tall buildings in district centres. The objection to the principle of a tall building in Purley, which, when all was said and done, was also the principal objection of the Rule 6 parties and of all other objectors, has to be seen in this light, namely, and I emphasise this, that the argument that Purley is an inappropriate location for a tall building is contrary to the development plan. The development plan has been years in the making. It has, as said, properly taken its lead from the London plan. Planning policies have progressed from the strategic to the specific, and in so doing, the development plan has been the subject of independent scrutiny through examinations in public. Through CLP 1.1 and beforehand CLP 1, the principle of tall buildings in district centres is encouraged. Through further careful and detailed townscape analysis, CLP 2 has provided specific support for a single tall building in Purley District Centre. Nor does the plan support for a 16-storey tall building cut across the case for a 17-storey tall building. None of the objectors' cases turn upon this marginal difference. The opportunity to object to the principle of a tall building in Purley District Centre was taken up by the Rule 6 parties and by Mr Philp through the examination of CLP2. Having made those objections, however, and following independent scrutiny, the relevant policy has proceeded towards adoption by the Council. As we've set out, the applicants fully expect that policy to be part of the adopted development plan by the time of the Secretary of State's decision. At that point, the objection to the principle of a tall building in Purley District Centre would have been comprehensively lost. This fundamental point must be kept very firmly in mind. There does, of course, remain the need to examine the merits of the particular design proposed by the applicants. London Plan Policy 7.7b reminds us that this is particularly important if the proposed location for a tall building is not identified in a borough's local development framework. The reason for this emphasis in cases where there is no local development framework support, unlike this one, is obvious. In such cases, the opportunity for detailed scrutiny and analysis through a local plan examination will not have taken place. Such scrutiny has, however, taken place in this matter and supports the principle of including a tall building within the scheme. Aside from the scrutiny given to the principle of a tall building in Purley through the local plan examination, there has been detailed, indeed exceptional, scrutiny given to the particular scheme proposed by the applicants. As we said in opening, the scheme is many years in the making and is a product of a very extensive, rigorous and careful process of analysis and thorough groundwork with, amongst others, the Council, the GLA and Transport for London, as well as comprehensive efforts to engage with the wider community. The work that has been done has been painstaking, well thought through and exemplary. Now, this was demonstrated convincingly by Mr. Matthews in his presentation of the scheme. The outcome of this painstaking work is the most wonderful scheme of exceptional design quality. To put the point bluntly, the proposed development, very much including its iconic Tool building, would be by far and away, the highest quality modern development in Purley. Today's controversy would become instead a source of pride. For reasons of this nature, the scheme complies with policies concerning design quality. Both the applicants and the council have in their evidence thoroughly addressed all of the design-related policies in the development plan, as found in, and we then list the various policy numbers, as well as policies to similar effect in the framework. There is an inevitable overlap in the matters covered by these policies. In closing, the applicants largely confine submissions on compliance with design-related policies to the criteria found in the London Plan Policy 77, since this is the policy that you identified in your main issues, but the points that we make below apply to the local development framework and the framework just as much and should be read accordingly. The conclusion reached by the applicants, the council and the GLA as well, that there is full compliance with all design-related policies in the development plan reflects the long and careful consideration that has been given throughout to achieving a well-designed scheme for this site. So we take the criteria in turn. There is no dispute from anyone at the inquiry that the application site is in a highly sustainable location with good access to public transport. Mr. Dennis, no, that was Mr. Charles King, wasn't it? Yes, sorry. Mr. Charles King, for the Rule 6 parties, quibbled with some minor details about public transport, that the applicants had overstated the quality of train services but understated the quality of bus services. The applicants disagree, but it doesn't matter. Overall, he agreed with its excellent sustainability credentials. The site's location in and directly adjacent to Purley District Centre is among the reasons why the District Centre is identified in various policies as an appropriate location for a Tool building. The detailed attention given by Mr. Matthews to context has resulted in a scheme which would be a considerable asset to Purley. Criteria 77CB, and this is in the London Plan, is a very good example of the importance of the plan-led nature of the scheme. The criterion is that Tool buildings should only be considered in areas whose character would not be affected adversely. This issue has been resolved conclusively through the plan-making process, which has determined that this is not an area that would be harmed in any such way by a Tool building. Both Mr. Noble and Mr. Lacavara praise the slenderness of the Tool building, Mr. Lacavara further emphasising how in his view the tower relates well to Purley, and Mr. Noble explaining how both the perforate tree-line form of the crown and the tracery elements of the tower will create a three-dimensional richness that will enhance Purley's skyline and provide for a building of exceptional quality. The form of the buildings across the site have otherwise been carefully designed to relate to the various boundaries and topography of the site, so enabling the scheme to increase in scale as the site drops down to the gyratory. In this way, the lowest building is placed adjacent to the library, whilst the tallest element of the scheme is at the low point of the site and facing the large open area of the gyratory. The detailed analysis of the design experts has affirmed that the scheme relates well to the form, proportion, composition, scale and character of Purley. It is important to stress that none of this requires a replication of what already exists. A scheme can, and this one does, complement and enhance the character of its context and yet be different from it. To be different, here with Purley's first tower, and given that the local plan supports only a tower rather than more than one, therefore, in all likelihood, its only tower is good rather than bad, provided the design handles its height well, as this scheme does. Mr. Dennis King gave evidence to the Rule 6 parties on matters relating to design and architectural merit. He is to be commended for the very fair way in which he has approached the inquiry. While objecting to the principle of a Tool building in Purley, he confirmed that his view is that the design of the scheme, including the Tool building, is excellent. His obvious professional respect for the work that has been done to achieve an excellent design extended to him also commending the detailing of the building, and in doing so he distanced himself from the statement in the Rule 6 Party's statement of case that the detailing is bog standard. Now, despite this, a number of other objectors have described the architecture as bog standard. The repeated use of this derogatory adjective, it means ordinary or basic, could not be further from the truth. The scheme is as far removed from the ordinary or basic as one can imagine. Sadly, there is a great deal of bog standard and bland modern architecture in Purley. In contrast, this scheme would be an exemplar of the best of contemporary architecture. Were the scheme to set any precedent, it would be that Purley can be home to high-quality architecture. The scheme would raise the bar for design quality in Purley. Observations, such as that made by one objector, this scheme takes its cues from the Tesco building, and by another, that it would be like the Berlin Wall, are to be blunt, and I use this word advisedly, crass. In contrast is the balanced, sensible, careful, and convincing analysis by Mr. Lacavara that this scheme is one of the very best schemes that he has ever considered. Indeed, one might think that by comparison to the newly built towers in Croydon, this scheme is of far greater distinction. Mr. Matthews explained as well the great care and attention that was given to the fine details, best seen on the full-size plans, just as it was to all other elements of the design. And the local plan requires that the design of tall buildings should be of exceptional quality and demonstrate that a sensitive approach has been taken in the articulation and composition of the building form. Mr. Noble and Mr. Lacavara were united in their expert view that the scheme readily achieves this and has resulted in a tall building, using Mr. Noble's words, that will be an exceptional and distinctive new contribution to the Purley skyline. And Mr. Noble concludes that this is architecture of rare distinction. Moving on, as Mr. Matthews explained, a key benefit of the scheme is how it emphasises a point of civic significance, both through the new public space at the corner of Russell Hill Road and the transparent design of the new community space with its multiple entrances and ground floor activities. The scheme will play a key role in identifying and hugely enhancing the heart of Purley. The additional and much improved public realm to be provided on Banstead Road, linking with the Purley Library, all assist, as Mr. Noble explained, to signal the location of the town centre and enhance the legibility of the area. The scheme would reinstate active frontages to Brighton Road, and with a new public realm at the corner with Russell Hill Road, would provide a positive and strong link with the shops and services within the rest of the district centre. In addition to these areas of animated public realm, a publicly accessible outdoor roof terrace would be available on the 5th floor of the community building. The scheme undoubtedly would improve the legibility of the area. Its ground and other floor activities would have a positive relationship to the surrounding streets. Permeability would be greatly enhanced. Despite the Rule 6 parties initially suggesting that the scheme would be cramped, the scheme in fact would be substantially set back from its key boundaries. The additional public realm to be provided on Russell Hill Road and Banstead Road, secured, it will be remembered, by the Section 106 obligation, would be a significant benefit to the scheme and would provide the strong link between the district centre and Purley Library described above. These matters demonstrate yet further elements of compliance with policy, but also that much of the criticism was, with respect, ill-informed. To suggest that the scheme was hard up to the site boundaries displayed a lack of understanding of the actual scheme. There were many such instances in the points made by the objectors. Mr. Pearson explained the considerable regenerative proposal of the scheme, both in the immediate sense of regenerating the part vacant, part verging on the derelict Brownfield application site, as well as through the increased local spending that would come from new residents, conservatively estimated as being some £1.25 million of additional expenditure just in Purley, and that's per annum, of course. In addition, both Mr. White and Mr. Pearson agree that the scheme represents a unique opportunity through investment in such a high-quality scheme right in the heart of Purley to inspire other new investment to come forward. this catalytic effect would be generated by the large increase in activity that the development would bring through the new residents and additional users of the community facilities, but also through having so visibly raised the quality of modern development here in the heart of Purley. All technical aspects of the tool building in respect of matters such as wind, overshadowing and noise have been appropriately assessed and determined to be acceptable. A detailed assessment was made by the applicants of views of the scheme in the townscape and visual impact assessment, and also by Mr Noble in his evidence. No adverse effect would be caused to any designated local or strategic view. To the contrary, as far as the applicants are concerned, Mr Noble's evidence explained that the scheme would have a beneficial effect on all views. Mr Philp argued that there would be a detrimental impact on views from Farthing Down. His arguments were supported by an attempted visualisation of the scheme, which was not verified, which was self-avowedly inexpertly created, and which in no way represents how the scheme would actually appear, or more to the point, not appear in this view. As Mr Noble explained, Mr Philp's attempted visual representation of the scheme was not from the panorama protected by the development plan, was in any event wrong, since the tower almost certainly would not be seen from any part of Farthing Downs, couldn't be seen in the verified view, which is at the highest location and so the most likely place where the scheme would be visible, and even if it could be seen, would be a positive feature in the view and so would not result in any adverse impact. There is, for all of the reasons summarised that have been summarised briefly here and which are set out in full detail in the applicant's witnesses' evidence, complete accordance by the scheme with all design-related policies. The principal point set against the careful analysis undertaken by the applicants, the council and the GLA was the assertion that the scheme doesn't respect and enhance local character because it includes the tool building. But the approach taken here by Mr Philp MP, and we also say the Rule 6 parties and all the objectors, was flawed. As Mr Philp confirmed in cross-examination, his approach was that unless something the same or similar to that which currently exists in Purley was proposed by the scheme, it couldn't respect and enhance local character. The effect of his position is, of course, that one could never have tool buildings in an area where there are no existing tool buildings. The nature of this objection, in any event, just serves to bring matters full circle. The place for the in-principle objection to a tool building in Purley was through the local plan examination. As we have already said, upon the new policy being adopted, that in-principle objection would have been lost. The scheme fully deserves to be described as outstanding. It would, as we said in opening, transform the site from one which blights Purley to one which instead, by far and away, would be the highest quality modern development in Purley. Moving away from matters of design, there was some difference of opinion among third parties in respect of affordable housing, with some saying too much is proposed, while the Rule 6 parties indicated, on the other hand, that there was not enough. The policy requirement, in essence, is to provide as much affordable housing as can be viably afforded. The requirement in the London Plan policy is to seek the maximum reasonable amount. This is precisely what is being done. The applicant's viability assessments have been subject to rigorous independent review and found to be robust. The GLA has moreover reviewed the assessments, again rigorously, and found that the maximum reasonable amount of affordable housing is being offered by the applicants. Given this independent and thorough testing on behalf of the Council and the GLA, there is no well-founded basis upon which to unpack, let alone unpick, the analysis. So you raised various queries concerning the affordable housing assessment. All of these have been addressed satisfactorily in various papers submitted to the inquiry. Mr Pearson otherwise explained in his evidence that the review mechanism in the Section 106 agreement would ensure that further affordable housing would be provided should the scheme prove to be more profitable and reap more than the standard developer's profit than presently assessed. All this is in accordance with policy and guidance. Finally, on this issue, it is important to grasp that when one is dealing as here with a fully policy-compliant mixed-use scheme, in the sense that the mix and disposition of the uses proposed is an exact match with the allocations of the site in the local plan, it is not open to the decision maker to require policy-compliant uses, here the church and community uses, to be removed, whether to be provided elsewhere or not at all, so that the entire site is residential with a higher number of affordable homes. The right approach, and the only one open to the decision maker, is to assess, to use the language of the London Plan relevant policy, the mixed-use scheme that is proposed. There was also the misguided assertion by Mr Philp and many other objectors that the scheme breached policy by providing housing at a density above the guideline level set out in one of the tables in the London Plan. As Mr Pearson explained, however, and as was put to Mr Philp in cross-examination, the guidelines provide no fixed point at which housing density becomes unacceptable. So much is clear from paragraph 328 of the London Plan itself, which states that the guidelines are not to be applied mechanistically. The GLA was entirely content with and supportive of the housing density of the scheme. 2/3 of development across London is outside the guidelines, mostly above the indicative maxima. Contrary to the way it was put by Mr Philp, the argument is not that because the policy is often breached, it is fine to breach it again, but rather that the facts bear out the simple point that the density guidelines are just that is to say guidelines and not ceilings. What matters is the quality of the scheme, not a mathematical calculation concerning density. There is no breach of policy in this regard at all. The other objections raised by the Rule 6 parties and third parties have all been fully covered by the applicant's evidence, as well as the evidence from the Council. None of these remaining matters demonstrate that there is a material or any breach of any policy of the development plan. As Mr Pearson explained, therefore, all of the evidence demonstrates convincingly that the application scheme accords the development plan, including when they're adopted, the new local plans. The presumption in favour of the development plan in this matter is a presumption in favour of granting planning permission. In the language of section 38, subsection 6 of the relevant Act, the determination which would be in accordance with the development plan would be to grant planning permission. It follows that unless material considerations indicate otherwise, and they don't, planning permission should be granted, and as the framework says in paragraph 14, without delay. So I turn to the other material considerations. Far from indicating otherwise the grant of permission, the material considerations that are an issue lend very substantial further weight to permission being granted. Mr Pearson grouped these considerations under the headings of social, economic and environmental benefits. For ease of analysis, this closing adopts the same approach. Social benefits. Significant among the benefits the scheme would provide is 220 new homes. Upon adopting the new local plan, the Council is required to provide a minimum of 32,800 new homes in Croydon between 2016 and 2036, an average of 1,640 every year. Plainly, the 220 homes to be provided by the scheme would make a worthwhile contribution to this requirement, the site being allocated in the new local plan, for some 211 homes, and accords with the government's continuing aim to boost significantly the supply of housing. Councillor Paul Scott, the chair of the Council's Planning Committee, spoke very persuasively as to the urgent need for Croydon to provide housing for present and future generations, including those who are struggling to afford a home in today's economic climate. As he said, providing housing in highly accessible locations such as Purley District Centre, where reliance on the private car can be, and in the case of this scheme positively is, minimised, makes obvious sense. The contribution made by the scheme to meeting what Councillor Scott described as a massively increasing supply of homes is in this highly sustainable location is quintessential good planning. The 39 affordable homes to be provided as part of this total is also a considerable benefit. As already explained, the level of affordable housing proposed accords with the development plan and may moreover increase if viability improves. Arrangements are already in place with the providers of the proposed affordable housing. Approving the scheme would ensure the affordable homes are in phase 1 of the scheme, the swift provision of much needed affordable homes. The provision of a new church and greatly enhanced community facilities would be a hugely significant social benefit. As Reverend Dr. Collins confirmed, Purley Baptist Church's community and church facilities are bursting at the seams, with good people battling to make do and mend with poor quality accommodation. The church already provides an admirably impressive range of services and facilities to the public for a broad range of the people, including children, disabled people and socially disadvantaged, through the provision of much needed, much improved church and community facilities. Reverend Dr. Collins explained that the quality and extent of those services could only and would be much improved. The new facility usage note provided by the applicants provides further detailed explanation about the anticipated use of the new community facilities, including by members of the general public. The spaces required to be made available to the public include the sports hall and a huge range of other spaces and facilities, which together would greatly increase the provision of accommodation and facilities available for community uses within the centre of Purley. As the new facility usage note explains, the types of uses that are envisaged as taking place within the facility are anticipated to include community healthcare facilities, work with children and young people, work with families, parents and carers, work with disabled people, work with the unemployed, work with refugees and asylum seekers, Christian activities, work with excluded or marginalised social groups, education and training, arts and drama including film, music performances, and sports, exercise and recreation. This is, on any view, an impressive and important range of public benefits. If the estimates of the applicants about the increased use of the community facilities are even approximately correct, a vastly increased proportion of local residents would benefit from the new facilities. In reality, the prediction of an almost fourfold increase in the number of people who would utilise the community facilities is likely to be a conservative estimate, and many more visitors than these could well in time utilise them. Now, we submit, and forcefully so, that the proposed church and community facilities are entirely in accord with and encouraged by all levels of planning policies, would bring huge social benefits, and should, and in reality must, be given very significant weight, indeed great weight, in favour of the proposals. Any other conclusion would defy logic and common sense and would be unfair and unjust. I turn to the environmental benefits. The application site in its current state is in large part an eyesore. This is a unanimously held view. The hoardings blight the town. Buildings on the site are either derelict, unfit for purpose or substandard. The regeneration of the application site and the inclusion within Purley District Centre of development of exceptional quality would undoubtedly benefit the town's environment. The scheme includes significant public realm enhancements, including the new public square on Russell Hill Road and the public realm along Banstead Road linking with Purley Library. Far from being crammed onto the site or cramped, the scheme would be stepped back from its boundaries and provide active and interesting frontages in place of the dispiriting boundaries that presently exist. As Mr. Pearson said in his evidence, the scheme would significantly enhance the quality and amenity of the public realm by providing a high-quality set of new buildings, facilities and landscaped areas. Paragraph 63 of the framework provides that great weight should be given to outstanding or innovative designs which help raise the standard of design more generally in the area. Both Mr. Noble and Mr. Lacavaro agree that the high standards set by the framework are met in this case. This is high and deserved praise by two very experienced professionals. Mr. Lacavaro, you'll recall, who has 14 years' experience working in Croydon, and who among his many credentials sits on the Design South East Design Review Panel and is one of the Mayor of London's 50 appointed design advocates, described the scheme as one of the finest that he has seen come through the planning process in Croydon. Mr. Lacavaro further praised the great care, thoroughness and exceptional attention to detail that has produced what he described as a masterful set of designs. He also described how, in his view, the scheme would revitalise the town centre and how the extensive testing that has been put into the evolution of the scheme has fully justified the provision of a tall landmark building facing onto the gyratory. All these matters reinforce the outstanding designs evident in Mr. Matthews' presentation of the scheme and the clear ability of the scheme to set an exemplary standard which cannot help but raise the standard of design more generally in the area. The applicant's commitment to delivering on these exemplary designs is underscored by the obligation in the Section 106 agreement to retain the existing architects, including Mr. Matthews, who was responsible for the detailed design of the development on the island site and the master planning of the south site. Mr. Cunningham gave examples of where Thornset has done just that and has delivered high-quality schemes as a consequence. The council and the applicant's one point of difference concerned whether there would be any heritage harm, while the council and Mr Lacavara in particular identified some modest harm to the setting of the listed Purley Library and of nearby non-designated heritage assets. Mr Noble's view is that no harm would be caused, and that in fact there would be overall benefits to heritage assets. The applicants maintain that the evidence of Mr Noble is to be preferred. It is, with respect, hard to see how transforming the site from an eyesore to one with a well-designed contemporary scheme on it could undermine the significance in heritage terms of the library or any other heritage assets. The public realm enhancements, including significantly adjacent to the library, would assist in knitting together the townscape in and around the relevant heritage assets and would bring significant enhancement. Mr Noble is right to conclude that there would be heritage benefit rather than harm arising from the scheme. But even adopting Mr Lacavara's assessment, however, there is no difference in outcome. His conclusion is that there would be some limited, less than substantial harm, which falls to be balanced respectively under the various paragraphs of the framework. The significant and considerable public benefits that arise from this scheme, including the great weight that should be given to the benefits of the community and the outstanding design quality of the scheme, very easily outweigh this limited harm, even when giving the weight and importance required by law to heritage impacts. Finally, in respect of environmental benefits, Mr Leonardatis confirmed that the application scheme would act to improve matters relating to surface water flooding. His evidence explained, and in fact the scheme would reduce peak runoff rates from both sites very significantly. The surface water flooding concerns raised by the Rule 6 parties would in fact be materially assisted by the scheme and its improved runoff rates. The Rule 6 parties accepted this benefit would arise, having heard this evidence. This didn't stop virtually every objector raising objections on the grounds of flooding. Now, this is another very good example of how concerns raised by objectors, however understandable, are based upon not being aware of the facts of the case. Economic benefits. The Rule 6 parties, while having initially disparaged the prospect of the many new residents and the new and expanded community facilities benefiting the town centre at all, reasonably and fairly accepted during the course of the inquiry that the scheme would assist in revitalising the town centre. That view accords with the Purley bid. Their letter states that in their view the scheme would clearly have a positive impact on local businesses within the town centre and that the scheme would be the start of significant regeneration which is long awaited. As Mr Cripps from the bid explained at the inquiry, times are tough. We need the influx of people. Mr Pearson explained how he considers the scheme, and the tool building in particular, would assist to announce Purley District Centre as a place to stop, as a place that is open for business, and how it would generate new business for the town centre, including by new residents and users of the community facilities shopping in the town centre or stopping for food and drink. His conservative estimate was that new residents alone would spend about £1.25 million per annum in the district centre, which on any view is a significant public benefit. The scheme would also result in new jobs for those employed by the church or in the new retail and community facilities, and has a potential to act as a catalyst for further regeneration. Together, these are, on any view, significant economic benefits. I turn then to other matters. The main concern raised by the Rule 6 parties in respect of traffic matters related to the location of the access to the island site being on Russell Hill Road. There was a tension in the objections raised by the Rule 6 parties in this regard, since notwithstanding their traffic-related concerns, they were also of the view that the scheme should have provided for more parking, which would of course act to exacerbate and not reduce any traffic congestion issues. Mrs Balboa explained in her evidence that the proposed access, egress to and from the island site was entirely acceptable in highways terms. It's been subject to Stage 1 safety audit, and Transport for London, as a responsible highways authority, has confirmed that it has no objections to the highway impacts of the scheme. As Mr Burton for the Council also explained, the traffic generated by the scheme would create a negligible increase in traffic, and its highly sustainable location strongly accords with relevant transportation policies. To put the matters raised by the Rule 6 parties in some context, paragraph 32 of the framework, national policy, provides that, and I quote, development should only be prevented or refused on transport grounds where the residual cumulative impacts of development are severe no evidence at all is before the inquiry which supports a conclusion that the impacts of the development would be severe. It is in fact the exact opposite, in that the effects are assessed as being negligible. The related concern of the Rule 6 parties about cars worsening air quality while idling and waiting to leave the car park on the island site was greatly exaggerated. As Reverend Dr. Collins confirmed in one of the documents, church members do not all leave at the same time following Sunday services. The reality is that departures from the car park would be spread out and would be in off-peak times in any event. As Mr. Burton also confirmed, car park marshals would be expected to manage departures from the car park and would be able to encourage drivers to switch off their engines rather than idling. The Section 106 agreement provides for anti-idling measures to mitigate what minor air quality impacts might otherwise arise from the development. Mr. Burton explained the success of these measures elsewhere in Croydon. Any modest air quality impacts caused by development traffic in this regard would be more than sufficiently mitigated by the measures able to be taken both on-site through traffic management and off-site through anti-idling measures undertaken by the Council. Mrs. Balbera explained how pedestrian safety had been expressly considered in the scheme design and how measures had been put in place to ensure a safe relationship between vehicles and pedestrians. The notion that the scheme would somehow result in a dramatic increase in pedestrian accidents in the area was comprehensively dispelled by her. The 5-year period analysed in the transport assessment showed only 2 accidents involving pedestrians, both of those involving a pedestrian walking into traffic rather than waiting for the green man signal to cross. And as Mrs. Balbera explained, there is more than sufficient space for greater numbers of pedestrians to use the present pedestrian crossings without interfering with traffic flows. As we say above, there was a tension in the Rule 6 parties saying on the one hand an unacceptable traffic impacts would arise, but on the other hand saying that there was insufficient parking. Mr. Burton for the Council explained that the guidance given by the London Plan is that in areas of good public transport accessibility, new development should aim for significantly less than 1 space per unit. The scheme fully accords with this guidance. The limited parking available on site is a clear benefit of the scheme, encouraging as it does the use by residents and users of the church and community facilities of sustainable transport options. The concern expressed by many objectors that there would be an overspill of cars parking on nearby streets is, with all respect, entirely unrealistic. As Mrs. Barbera explained, it is fanciful to suppose that new residents would be so committed to having a car that they would be dedicated enough to constantly move their vehicle to avoid the controlled parking zone times, which extend in adjacent streets from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. on weekdays and on Saturday, for which they would not be entitled to have a permit. Mr. Cunningham and Mr. Gershon explained how a recent development in Purley with car parking spaces had in fact failed to sell them when the flats were being marketed. This supports the applicant's assessment that the highly accessible location of the scheme would attract residents who don't have a car or who are willing to forego a car in lieu of being able to rely on the excellent public transport connections that the site offers. Mrs. Balbero has carefully assessed the parking requirements of the church for its Sunday service. The church's car park is estimated to be able to provide for 88 members of the congregation, allowing for carpooling and the use of other modes and so on, leaving more than sufficient parking in the free on Sundays long-stay car parks, which are a short walk away in the district centre. Mr. Burton confirmed that any redevelopment of the existing car parks would require re-provision of parking or evidence demonstrating that alternative parking is available. In short, the proposed parking is entirely policy compliant and is entirely logical and sensible given the location of the site. It is a good thing, not a bad thing, to have little parking on a site located as this one is. And so we turn, sir, to the overall planning balance. The position reached, having considered all the above matters, is that the application scheme, through the great care and attention that has gone into designing the buildings, but also in ensuring that all relevant planning considerations have been fully addressed, accords entirely with the development plan, including the London Plan. This addresses the first of the matters referred to by the Secretary of State as being of interest to him when he called in this application. The application scheme, moreover, fully accords with the policies in the National Policy Framework, requiring good design of the built environment. Indeed, through the outstanding nature of the design that is proposed and the potential to help raise the standard of design more generally in the area, the scheme accords with paragraph 63 of the framework, and so is entitled to be given great weight in the planning balance. This addresses the second of the Secretary of State's matters. The further issues and queries raised by you, sir, have been addressed in summary above and through the evidence presented to the inquiry, including through a series of inquiry documents. All the matters raised have been given full and careful consideration, and in all cases the applicant's submission is that there is material compliance with the development plan and that none of the points raised could conceivably justify the refusal of the scheme. Given the policy-compliant mix and disposition of uses proposed and support for a tall building in Purley, and in any event, alternative ideas or notions for the redevelopment of the site are beside the point. It is the scheme put forward which is to be assessed. In sum, the excellent scheme that is put forward according to the development plan represents sustainable development, and material considerations provide powerful additional support in favour of the grant of planning permission. And so I turn to our conclusions. As was said in opening, the proposed development truly is a once-in-a-generation opportunity. Purley Baptist Church has aspired to improve its community facilities and the church for decades, but has been unable to do so, despite the overwhelming generosity of many who have donated large sums of money to assist to achieve the church's vision. Through its partnership with the Thornset Group, which has an exemplary track record of delivering high-quality community-led development, the church now has the chance to realise its aspirations to the benefit of the community at large. Mr. Cunningham spoke passionately about the commitment and hard work that has gone into the design of what can very fairly be described as the outstanding scheme that is the subject of this application. Given the clear compliance with the development plan and the wide-ranging and huge public benefits that would follow were the application scheme to be allowed to proceed, it would be a travesty to do anything other than approve this excellent and entirely worthwhile scheme. It is rare in planning to have the opportunity to make a decision. It is rare in planning to have the opportunity to make a decision that would bring so much benefit to so many people, to the local community at large. This wonderful opportunity for so much good to be done should be seized rather than shunned. And for all these reasons, so we urge you to recommend approval of this application and for the Secretary of State to grant planning permission. So those are our closed submissions. Thank you very much indeed, sir, for the way in which you've conducted this inquiry. It's enabled us and others, I hope and I understand, to address any points that you were particularly interested in, if you like, or potentially concerned about. And it's certainly been despite the fact there are strongly held opposing views, it's certainly been a very good-natured inquiry, and so you must take a lot of commendable responsibility for that being the case. Thank you very much indeed, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Katkowski. Can I thank all of you for your contributions and for your help in making this an efficient as well as thoroughly run inquiry, and may I wish you all a safe journey home. The inquiry is closed.